Great, thank you. Hi, I'm Alex. I am an assistant professor. Spoiler alert. I'm an assistant professor of industrial organizational psychology at Purdue. What I'm talking to you about today is a labor of love with Lindsay Larson, who just had to duck out because she is at Carnegie Mellon and had teaching responsibilities, so she had to run away. But she's wonderful, and if you see her, I'm sure she'd love to talk to you as well about this. My background as an industrial organizational psychologist is focused on individual differences, psychometric assessment of social perception. Lindsay really specializes in teamwork and technology-enabled contexts, leadership in those contexts. And together we're really interested lately in this space of teamwork, human team science, and how we can learn from human team science to better understand human AI teams. We also think there's a lot that we can learn from human AI teams to teach us more about teamwork, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about ideas we have in that space as well. But because we're interested in these two parallel tracks and we come from a rich tradition of human team science, we've been looking at that literature and we've been looking at the human AI team literature as it starts to emerge, and we've noticed some really interesting parallels between those two spaces. So I want to draw your attention to the quote that was just on the screen a second ago. This is from the 90s, specifically in relation to human teams. So the word team gets bandied about so loosely that many managers are oblivious to its real potential, its real meaning or its true potential. So back in the day, human teams really started to be solidified as an area in the 80s and the 90s, as indicated by that quote, right, from Harvard Business Review. I think we're seeing something similar happen right now in the human AI teaming space. There are a lot of different definitions out there for what constitutes a human AI team. And we're using this term pretty loosely. We have a session right now on human AI teams, right? So probably this doesn't take a lot of convincing for you all, but it's important to also think that it's beyond just the scholarship that's happening in spaces like this, right? Some of you work at specific companies that have started to introduce AI teammates. I actually saw, I flew through O'Hare on the way to get here, and there was this giant billboard that talked about the new Notion AI team, and it was like your AI note taker and your AI creative assistant, whatever, like an AI team. So this is being advertised in airports, right? This is commonplace now where people are using these terms. But using these terms does not mean that AI is in fact a teammate, right? We're using these labels, we're presenting AI in this way, but this doesn't necessarily mean that people are actually perceiving AI as a teammate. We know this is important already from the human literature. We know that groups, not all groups are teams, right? There are specific criteria that are necessary to make something a team. We also know that calling someone a teammate in a human context can have some pretty real implications in organizations, how people identify. We just heard a presentation that talked about the many benefits of being in a team. We are naturally, as humans, sort of drawn to teamwork. We want to be in teams, and there are lots of different benefits that come from that. But just calling AI a teammate, even if it's advancing, even if there are lots of new exciting things it can do, calling it a teammate does not necessarily mean that we're going to get all those benefits we see in human teams. So it's really important for us to actually tease out what's going on here, because these labels can have real consequences. So this is what our presentation is focused on, is exploring the impact of those role perceptions, roles specifically, on acceptance. There are a lot of different outcomes we could look at here, but we think acceptance is probably one thing most people are interested in, right? And generally here, the idea is probably we think that something good is happening. Otherwise, why would we be so excited about teammates, right? We think there's probably some sort of benefit to thinking of it as a teammate. Specifically, we propose a mechanism through mind perception. So we've heard a lot about theory of mind today, but I want to draw a slight distinction between mind perception and theory of mind. So mind perception is specifically that perception of mental states. So it doesn't matter, at least mind perception for this construct, what the AI's abilities actually are. What we're interested in here is the extent to which people believe that an entity, humans, dogs, AI, whatever, has capacity for two specific dimensions, a capacity for strategic thinking or agency and a capacity for emotions or feelings, which is called conscious experience. And the reason we're interested in mind perception as the specific mechanism is because we think it parallels some of the core criteria for when AI is a teammate. I just mentioned there are like a million different definitions of when AI is a teammate. But if you cut across all those really broadly, we see two key criteria. The first is autonomy, freedom in decision-making and task execution, which we think parallels that agency dimension. And the second is people argue that we need some kind of capacity for human-like states and traits, mental or emotional states that, again, parallel conscious experience. So that's what we think is broadly happening here, that we have roles, that influences mind perception, and that in turn influences AI acceptance. Again, there are a lot of different ways that we could define AI acceptance. So just very briefly here for the context of this presentation, we're defining AI acceptance from both kind of a tech-centered lens and also a human-centered lens. So from a tech-centered lens, often when we think about technology acceptance, we think about it just as use. Do the humans want to use, or are they willing to use the AI? Or whatever tech you're interested in. So broadly here, we're focused on a couple dimensions from the technology acceptance model, indicators of usefulness, perceived ease of use, and of course, intent to use. These pretty much are what they sound like, right? Do you think that it's actually gonna help you in your job in some way? How hard is it gonna be to use, and do you intend to use it? That's great, but when we think about teams, we're often not just focused on whether we're going to use our teammates, right? We have some sort of other construct that is an indicator of acceptance that's more effectively loaded. So for that, we look at trust. Trust also has a really rich tradition in the human AI literature, so this seems like a natural place to start. So we look at cognitive trust, which is more of a rational evaluation of reliability and dependability. And then we also look at affective trust, which is an emotional evaluation rooted in interpersonal care and concern. Both of these have been shown to be really important in human team contexts as well. So we're looking at both of these perspectives. So we have role, we have mind perception, and we have acceptance. Now, I mentioned earlier, perception does not equal presentation. So this is specifically what we're trying to unpack, is understanding the difference between perception and presentation and whether simply presenting AI as a teammate has some sort of meaningful consequence. So we're looking at our three different dimensions. We're specifically proposing that agency is gonna influence the first two, conscious experience influences the third, and we're gonna start off just by establishing perception. So I'm gonna walk you through these three studies. The first one, we're just interested in establishing this link, that basically, if we think of AI as a teammate, then we are gonna see the expected relationships with mind perception. So looking at that perception link and establishing that specifically. Then, in studies 2 and 3, we're gonna manipulate presentation. So we're gonna call AI, first teammate versus support. In our third study, we're gonna look at teammate versus tool. We're starting with teammate versus support because we wanted to be able to show or look at, and we show, that this is different in humans versus AI, right? So actually looking at whether these presentation labels, these role labels, differ for whether we're using them for human or AI newcomers. I don't know the last time you were called a tool, but it's generally not considered a positive thing to be called a tool if you're a human, right? So we're starting with teammate versus support, which is much nicer for humans, and then we're gonna move on to teammate versus tool. So that's what we'll do in our third study. Studies 2 and 3 are both experimental vignettes. I'm not gonna read this to you in the interest of time, but if you wanna know more, I'm happy to tell you. So study 1, we established the relationship between perception and mind perception. So this is literally, we just asked people who use AI at least once a week to report on whether they would consider their AI that they work with a teammate, a tool, or a support using those three labels. In general, we find that people who say that they perceive it as a teammate do in fact report higher mind perception, both in terms of agency and a teammate, or in terms of agency and conscious experience. The relationship is stronger, that contrast is stronger for teammate versus tool than it is for teammate versus support. So study 2, we are specifically trying to manipulate that presentation and looking at whether calling it a teammate versus a support has meaningful consequences. So here again, perceptions of agency were higher for AI that was presented as a teammate, relative to support. We did not see that effect for conscious experience. So we think this is probably because, again, we're using that teammate versus support contrast versus a teammate versus tool. Notably, we did not see any effect of role on mind perception among humans, but we did see higher mind perception across the board. People think other people have more capacity for mental and cognitive states than AI, which makes sense, right? So good news for our manipulation. So these are a lot of numbers. I'm going to try to direct you really quickly. Basically, what this is showing here is that AI role presentation does positively influence each of our technology acceptance dimensions: usefulness, intent to interact, and ease of interaction. Role influences those outcomes via agency, just as we would expect. Also influences it for cognitive trust, through agency on cognitive trust, but not for affective trust, which again we would expect because our manipulation did not end up influencing affective trust. So then the question is, would these results be stronger if we actually compared to that specific tool use or that tool label that we tend to use when we think about AI? So that's what we're looking at in study 3. We're presenting the AI as either a teammate or a tool. And here our results are a lot clearer. So perceptions of agency were higher for AI that was presented as a teammate relative to AI that was presented as a tool. And perceptions of conscious experience were also higher for AI presented as a teammate than a tool. So the mere act of calling it a teammate elicits higher mind perception. People are going to think it has more capability for both agency, strategic thinking, and conscious experience, those emotional capacities. And in turn, role presentation influences all of our outcomes through mind perception, just as we expect. So again, AI role presentation, so calling it a teammate, is positively related to all dimensions of AI acceptance, usefulness, perceived ease of use, and interaction through agency. But I want to draw your attention to something notable here, which is in the middle. We see negative effects. So here we see that when we control for mind perception, presenting AI as a teammate also has a negative consequence for all 3 of our technology acceptance model outcomes. So there seems to be something else going on, that calling it a teammate can actually backfire in some ways. Cognitive trust, we again see that positive outcome or positive effect of role presentation on cognitive trust through agency. And we see a positive effect on affective trust through conscious experience. Notably here, we don't have significance for our direct effects in the middle there, but that negative 0.21 is in the same direction as we saw previously. It's just not significant. So what do we do with all this? A reminder of our full model. So first of all, more collaborative AI roles, teammate versus something like support and tool, positively influence AI acceptance, defined a variety of both tech-centered and human-centered ways, via mind perception. So basically, when we call something a teammate, we're eliciting some kind of expectation for the mental states that that thing is going to have. But there may also be some sort of negative effect happening. That positive effect seems to primarily happen through mind perception, and beyond that, there might be something negative happening. Notably here, also agency and conscious experience differentially predicted our outcomes, as we expected, which emphasizes the need to incorporate both these human-centered and tech-centered models when we're thinking about effective integration in teams and making sure that people are responding to AI positively. So a few other considerations, focusing on that inconsistent mediation, that positive indirect effect. AI role positively influences acceptance through mind perception, but has a negative direct effect. There's clearly something going on here that we need to unpack, right? There's some other mechanism happening, and this seems to differ from humans. Generally in the human literature, and this is, I didn't show it, but this is what we find in our data as well, calling people teammates is generally a positive thing. There aren't a lot of negatives in humans, but this is different than what we're seeing in AI. We suggest that a possible avenue forward is going to be exploring labels beyond tool and teammate, looking for things in between, something like support, something like assistant, There are also obviously potential circumstances where teammate is totally appropriate, but we need to be considering the full range of spectrums, the full range of labels, because clearly these labels have real consequences. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to take any questions, and I appreciate talking to you.
So a question about the negative effect that you observed. There's positive effects, but also negative effects of calling an AI a teammate. Mm-hmm. Is it possible that because there are humans that are more mistrusting of AI, so if you slap on the label teammate, they're going to be like, not sure about that. Is that a possible bias that might be resulting with this negative effect, or what's your speculation on
Yes, so that is totally possible. We did explore and control for a variety of measures that look at like AI hesitancy. I think we specifically used an adapted measure of the negative attitudes towards robots scale adapted for AI. We didn't find any particular evidence that those effects vary by people who have that. However, I would also say that that is going to be probably really closely linked to mind perception, so it's hard to tease those things out. So there is also a substantial amount of evidence that there are individual differences in mind perception. So both in terms of like familiarity, and that's not just AI, also in things like animals, we know people who have more familiarity with certain things it affects their mind perception of them. So there are going to be a lot of individual differences that could potentially affect mind perception. So that is absolutely something that we need to work towards teasing out, but it's also going to be difficult to fully separate those things because there's sort of a reciprocal relationship in some ways. But great question, thank you.
We've got time for one more quick question.
Thank you for the talk. I was wondering, how do you control or measure the agency in this case?
How do we measure agency? Yeah, so in this particular study, we used a scale, a self-report scale of perceptions of agency. There are a variety of different mind perception scales that exist. As part of this study, we did a lit review of all those different scales. We did a psychometric validation of those scales. We selected a subset of items that were most appropriate. And yeah, so it's self-report.
Yeah, that was the question, self-report.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you.
Let's thank our speaker one more time.